Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Intro to Advanced SQL Querying Fundamentals, presented by our fantastic technical instructor for today, Sandy Stevenson. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use that chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or evening, wherever you're located. We're going to look a little bit today at how do we work with tables. In SQL, in a relational database management system, our data is stored in tables. So we need to know how we're going to create that table and even create the database and a schema or a namespace, if you will, that table is going to belong to. So our required pieces that we need to be able to create a table is the create table statement along with the schema that table is going to belong to. And then in our parentheses, we need the column names, the data types of each column, whether that column's allowed to be null or not. And we also want to make sure we specify a primary key for a table. A table, again, is what stores our data. And in SQL, we can store really any kind of data, but the system has to know what the data type is, along with many other types of software and systems always need to know a data type. SQL is the same way. Every table should have a primary key. That is your unique identifier to get to a specific row in a table. Primary key must be unique and must always have a value. It's never allowed to be null. That way you can get to a specific row in a table. So we're using a create statement. It's create table, schema name dot table name. And the example I used here is a sales schema, and the table is called my customers. And in this table, it's going to have a customer ID. Now notice I have open and closed parentheses here. So it'll have a customer ID, which is an integer data type. I'm making it an identity column, which will start at 1 and increment by 1. It's like an auto number type column. It will be the primary key. I'm also going to have, and notice a comma there too, so I'm separating my columns with commas. I'll have a customer name. It's a variable character length. It can go up to 30 characters. It's not allowed to be null. And I'll have a contact name, which is a variable character, again, of 30, and it is not allowed to be null either. And this is just an example of creating a table. So executing this will create the My Customers table in the sales schema with a customer ID, a customer name, and a contact name. At that point, then you would be able to insert data into the table. Now, obviously, for any of this, you have to have permission in SQL to be able to do it. Creating tables is part of data definition language, or DDL. The statements you would see in that are create, alter, and drop. So when we go to insert data, we would then use the insert statement. So we specify full name, okay, schema name dot table name, insert into sales dot my customers, then the columns that I'm inserting data into. Now, when I create this, I'm using that customer ID as an identity column, so I don't insert data into that. In this example, I'm inserting into customer name and contact name, and then the values of what are being inserted. Now, I also want to clarify, you're not going to sit in SQL all day long and insert data like this. We typically insert data by either moving data or bringing data across the wire or doing ETL or through an application. We're not sitting typing in insert statements all the time. But it's important to know how to do them, especially maybe there was data corruption. You had removed some things and there's a couple rows you need to insert, or you need to test something. So it's important to know how to insert, plus any scripts that we may write may have insert as well. When you store procedures, we might be inserting data. There's always times where I need to update data as well. Maybe someone makes a payment on something. I need to update that table and specify they made a payment. Or maybe a customer name changes. So we use the update statement. So again, update table, schema name dot table name. So update table sales dot my customers. And here it's setting the customer name to Acme Tools, where the customer ID is 1. Now, notice I didn't say where the customer name is Acme Vending. Because let's say, for example, you're updating, my background is in credit and collection. Let's say I'm updating a debtors table and maybe someone got married and their last name is now Jones, where it was Smith before. Well, if I update with the last name of Smith, I'm going to be updating every single debtor in that table that has the last name of Smith. So you always want to make sure you're being very specific and make sure you use the where clause. If you're updating or deleting data and you're not using the where clause, you're going to update every single row in the table or delete every single row in the table. So that's very important. Now, there may be times you want to update. Maybe you're updating a price. Maybe you're having a price increase of 5%. Yeah, then you might want to update every single row in a product table, something like that. More often than not, you're going to want to have that where clause. There's times we need to delete data. Maybe something is wrong. We're doing a large purge, something like that. We delete from schema name dot table name. So here I'm deleting from in the sales schema, the my customers table, where the customer ID is 1. Again, make sure you're using the where clause. So now let's go out and have a look at this. I have a lab machine launched, similar to what we use in some of our classes. Excuse me just a moment. Allergies are bad. So what I thought I'd do, instead of just starting off with showing you how to create a table, I'm going to create a database first. If I can type today. That's how you know it's live. So I'm going to say create database. And you'll get to see all my wonderful typos because I'm typing this in instead of copying and pasting. I'm going to create a database here called, I'm going to call it Acme. I'll use Acme Vending since I had that in my slide. I'm going to type Go. Now, Go is a batch separate. It's not execute. If I was in SQL command prompt, then it would be execute. But in Management Studio, it's simply separating batches. So if I then say I want to use that database, that will switch me then over to that database. So if I select this much and I execute this, provided I have no syntax errors, the database is now created. And notice I am switched to that database. I don't see it in Object Explorer yet until I right-click on databases and select refresh. Now I can see my Acme Vending database. Well, I want to create a schema for my customers table. So in my Acme Vending database, I can see that's the database I'm in. I'm going to create a schema called sales. Now select that and execute it. Now in the Acme Vending database, if I expand it and I expand security, and I come right under here under schemas, I can now see that I have a sales schema. Okay, and they're really logical. Schemas are really logical. Back prior to 2005, back in 2000 and backward, the flow of a schema or the fully qualified name, for example, would have been server name dot database name dot owner dot object. Because at that time, when you created a user, anything the user created would have been prefixed with their name. And it's still that way in Oracle. But when we went to 2005 and we went on to the .NET platform, and ever since, the name path is server name dot database name dot schema dot table. A schema can be used for an extra layer of security, can be used for a namespace as well. And then I can give my users a default schema. Well, now I want to create a customers table. So I'm going to say create table, schema name, which will be in sales, not customers. And now I'll come down and I am big on structure in my code. Anytime you're doing more than one line in a statement, for example, the where clause I always indent. When I'm joining tables, the on clause I always indent. Nested queries or subqueries, absolutely indent, because you don't want everything down wholly down the left side. Scripts can get kind of large, and if you have everything down the whole side, that can get hard to troubleshoot, hard to read, hard to share with someone else and teach them as well. So you always want to structure your code. So my first column, my customers table, it's going to be a customer ID. It's going to be an integer data type. I'm going to make it an identity column, and it's going to be the primary key. So using that identity column, it's going to start at 1 and increment by 1. And I can only have one identity column in a table because it has to stay in order of the column. And it always is an integer as well. Well, I'm also going to have, for example, customer name. And this customer name, in fact, let me line this up a little bit cleaner here. This customer name is going to be a variable character length. I'm going to make it size of 40. So 40 is the maximum it's allowed to go. It's not allowed to be null either. I want to make sure there's a name in there. And I'm going to keep this table small, guys, for our time constraints here. I'm also going to have a contact name. And that I will have be 40 as well. And I don't want that to be null either. Those are the only columns I'm going to have dimness, again, due to time constraints. So I'm going to put a closing parenthesis in here. When I select this now, provided I have no syntax or typing errors, this will create the customers table. So when I look at my Acme vending database and I expand tables, here's my customers table. So I can see that's been created. Now, it doesn't have any data in it yet. In fact, if I do a select, okay, if I do a select from the customers table, customers. As I said, that's how you know it's live. Okay, notice the structure's there, but there's no data. I haven't inserted any data into it yet. So I need to do that now. So I'm going to say insert into customers, sales.customers. It's best to always specify the column names within parentheses. Now, technically, if you're inserting data into every column, you don't have to specify the column names, but I've got to tell you that can get you into a mess too. It's always best practice to specify them. Now, again, since I have an identity column, I don't want to insert into the customer ID. The system's going to do that for me. So I'm going to insert into the customer name and the contact name. And now I have my value statement. So since I'm entering text data, I need to have single quotes around it. It'll be separated by commas. So this first customer, excuse me, is going to be called, just making up names here. It's going to be Jones Hardware. The contact name will be Jeff Smith. So that's one row. I'm going to put a comma here. I'm going to add another row as well. So I'm just going to come right on over to that parenthesis. That comma is known as a row constructor. It means I'm going to add more than one row. So this next one will be make it widgets and gadgets. And that contact name will be okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And let me make sure what I didn't mess up here. Customer name, contact name. That's correct. That's correct. I'm doing something stupid here.
Just wanted to chime in really quickly. We
Please
had some
do.
people in the chat saying that customer name is misspelled. You got it.
Thank you, everyone.
The audience is on it. Good job,
You know,
everyone.
you
This
guys are always going to see a mistake before I do because I'm sitting here looking at it. Those that are on looking are always going to catch it. Thanks so much for that. So now, once again, when I look at my data, there we go. There are my two rows. And the guys, those are things you'll see in live world, in your organizations too. We all make typos. You're going to see that. So there's my two rows. Now, maybe, I'm going to add one more row here. And I want to show you why. So let me remove this one, remove this comma, and I'll make this I'm inserting one more row. When I look at the data, does anybody see anything wrong with it? Anyone see anything wrong? Notice the contact name is actually in customer name. Here's the customer name. Here's the thing. It's text data. So SQL doesn't care that it was put in incorrectly. It doesn't care. It's text data. It's variable character length data, which means, I've got to update that. I'm going to have to update that. So now notice that was customer ID 3. Okay, so I'm going to modify data here because I need to update that. Let's say update sales customers. I'm going to set the customer name equals, and that customer name is going to be Northwind Traders, where, maybe use my where clause, where customer ID equals 3. Now I'm going to put a comma up here because I also want to change the contact name. So the contact name would be Ruth Appleby. Okay. So notice I didn't say update the customer name to Northwind Traders where the customer name is whatever. I didn't do that. Okay, I'm looking right at customer ID 3. So I specifically pinpoint that row. If I look at my data again now, notice that is now corrected. Okay, so that's how we update. Also, there may be, maybe I want to do some testing. I'm looking at maybe going to roll something over to another server, or maybe I want to capture data and put it into another file to be verified for that day's work, something else to be done with it. I can create a new table from an existing table, keep all those same columns, all the same data, all the same column names, and so forth. So to do that, I'll say select, and in this case, I want everything from, into, and I'm going to call this sales new customers from the customer table. So when I run this now, and come over and right click on my tables and refresh that, notice now I have the new customers table. If I query on the new customers table, you'll notice I should have those 3 rows, sales. You'll notice I should have those 3 rows, same column names and so forth, same data. If I expand new customers and I expand columns, okay, you'll notice that customer ID is an integer, not null. But if I look at the sales customer table and I look at the columns, notice that's the primary key. It is not here. Okay, so it doesn't carry over the constraints. That's my point to that. Doesn't carry over the constraints. So now I have this new table. Well, there might be some data I want to delete. So maybe customer ID 3 was put in incorrectly for whatever reason. Something's totally wrong. I'm just going to delete it. Okay. Again, I want to make sure I use the where clause. So I'm going to say delete from sales customers, where customer ID equals 3. So when I run this now, okay, that's now deleted that row. When I select the data, customer 3 is gone. And maybe we may come to a point where, maybe I'm going to truncate a table. Truncating is like deleting, but it's only minimally logged into the transaction log, which means I'm not going to come back from it. Okay, I can't come back from it. So here, I'm going to truncate that new customers table. So truncate table, new customers. So this is going to wipe that table out, but it's going to retain the structure. So I could use that on a daily basis for updates, things like that. I could reuse that to just insert data into it and then wipe it out when I'm done with it. So right now, if I look, at that table, again, structure remains, but the data is gone. And then finally, sometimes we're totally done with the table and we don't need it anymore. Sometimes we're completely done, so we remove it. And we do drop table, schema name, table name. So this will drop the data and the structure completely. So if I go to look at that data, notice I get an error. The table is now gone as well. So if I come over under my tables again and I right click and refresh, notice the table is now gone. So there's a little bit about creating a database with the defaults. I also created a sales schema. I created a sales schema here to hold that customers table. I created the customers table with the customer ID, a customer name, a contact name. I had the customer ID as an identity column and used it as a primary key, made it unique. I also inserted data into that customers table, and then I modified that data as well, again, using a where clause and using the primary key there as well. And then I created a new customers table from the customers table to show that we can create a new table from another table and have all those same columns and the same data in there as well. I'm going to show you how to delete data, as well as how we truncate a table, and then finally, how to drop a table. Mariella, I will turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. If anyone needs any more information on this topic, they can definitely visit us at newhorizons.com. We have a couple of dates up there for parts of our SQL querying fundamentals. And if you missed out on any part of the session, I saw a couple questions. We will definitely be sharing this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar today. And I believe that gives us a quick couple of minutes. If anyone has any last minute questions, please go ahead and throw it in the chat. Got a lot of great feedback. Oh, we got a question too.
So I see here that Leanna wants to know how you create a primary key to an existing table. You would have to alter that table. You'd have to alter that table and then determine what your primary key is going to be. You'd have to alter the table, alter the column, and then set that particular column as a primary key or add a column in as a primary key. But I also have to warn you, if your table is already created and it has data in it, if you go to create a primary key off of an existing column, don't be surprised if you cannot, because it may have duplicates. But that is how you would do that.
Fantastic info. Absolutely. I had another question here that I can definitely answer. Someone had a question about where we can go to sign up for these sessions. I just dropped a link in the chat really quickly. So if you want to take a look at all of the sessions that Educate 360 is going to be running, we're going to have them there in the free webinars. And then for the prior sessions for the part one, we're going to follow up in the email after the webinar too. So that email after the webinar will have that part one recording link and the current recording link for today. And I believe believe that should be the last question. Yeah, I think that was the last question. So, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today, and thank you, Sandy, for all this fantastic info. I know there's a lot to cover too, so thank you so much for throwing in a nice, quick 30-minute session. Really appreciate you.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here with me.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we hope to see you very soon, hopefully in another session or in the classroom. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye, all.